I want to start this video off by saying this isn't the first project for Dungeons & Dragons that I've done, and it certainly won't be the last. That being said, with all I've worked with, you'd think I would start learning the game a little, but, well, I haven't. And so, instead of rambling my way through a story I know nothing about, I got another one of my friends to voice some blurbs about each of the characters that he asked me to draw, and each will be narrated by one of these characters, Deckard Monahan. But without further ado, let's get into the good, the bad, and the robot. The computer screen's over here.
The name's Deckard Monahan, and this is the good, the bad, and the robot descriptions. The good, Prince Pebble. To all knowledge, the prince is not a prince. At least, according to him. To my recollection, he is a half-elf druid. Of what circle, I couldn't tell you. From what I can tell you, though, his quiet, observant nature lays a dormant leader, unsure of his next step. He is by all accounts the moral compass when it comes to the three of us, seeing as how X3 and myself would much rather kill enemies. He finds friends in them. A talent which I admire. I must state this again, however, he is by all accounts not a prince.
As these pictures go on, you'll probably be able to tell which order I actually drew them in, because with each character I built on my drawing process, especially in the shading and rendering phase. And while yes, most artists do that, it's been a long time since I did a digital painting, especially one of humans that required posing and lighting. The last thing I did was back in 2022 when I did the Deadlands weapons, but those were supposed to be ghostly manifestations of weapons instead of physical things, so shading wasn't as prominent in those as they are here. And so with Prince Pebbles here, he was the last one I actually did, and first and foremost I decided to work more with poses that I wasn't too familiar with. I still stuck head on, but I tilted his head up more, which exposed the chin or lower jaw here and the bottom of the nose where the nostrils are, something I'm not too familiar with drawing. I had to go back a couple of times and make sure the angling matched, and I think they turned out pretty good. When it came to the shading and rendering, I had already drawn the other two at this point, so it was drastically different from when I started this project, but I opted to go with more smooth shading here than I did with X3 and Deckard, using a softer brush with a lower opacity and flow to paint in multiple layers of exposure to add the shadows and the highlights, giving it a more smoother look and less cel shaded than the other two in this project. The rocks were probably the most difficult to draw in terms of reality versus expectation. My original plan to draw a thick outline and then separate the faces with rigid lines didn't work out as I expected, and I think part of the reason for that is I didn't vary up the line weight that much between the outside and the inside of the rocks, meaning the outline and the lines that separated the different angles were roughly the same thickness. And not only should I have made them much thinner, but I think if I broke up the lines a little more so they were not solid all the way through, it would look better. But instead I decided to just use the outline as a base shape and focus more on coloring and lighting to separate the different face angles. Do they match stylistically with Prince Pebbles? Not too much, but I still like how they turned out and definitely might use this going forward or learning how to adapt rocks into my drawing style. One thing I will say about the rocks though is that I could have used more shading to add depth to them, because right now they all look like they're on the same plane of existence rather than revolving around Prince Pebbles' body. But with that being said, here's our first character, the good, Prince Pebbles himself.
The bad, me, aka Deckard Monahan. While I am good looking, I am most definitely the bad. Why, you may ask? A long story involving some crimes which I may or may not have committed. For all accounts, we'll say I didn't. I am an Echo Knight fighter and a former criminal. My life has been a journey in and of itself, and yet I am constantly still learning. Pebbles says I have a short temper, but a lot of words he says I don't fully understand. but when it comes down to it, I'd much rather reason with you than kill you.
Right off the bat, the first thing I want to point out for Deckard's design was his gun. Now, not only have I never drawn an anatomically correct weapon before, save for the Deadlands videos, but I've also never worked with one at such a drastic angle. When I did the rifles for the Deadlands weapons video, it was a side view and it was very flat. So what I actually did was hopped into Hero Forge, where these models that I were given to redraw were actually created, chose the same exact pistol that Deckard had in his model, and colored each part of the gun a different color, so I can see how each of the parts interact and how the lines intersect. And I was also able to rotate the model and screenshot the gun at the exact angle I needed it, which made it so much easier. You'll hear more about this in X3, but references are beautiful. And even if I had a gun broken down into parts, but it was only a side view, I don't think it would have turned out as good as having this reference that I was able to take myself. Now, the gun wasn't the only challenge for Deckard's, because at some point I also realized that Deckard had hair. Let me explain. Hair is always something I struggled with, specifically with how it frames and interacts with the face. This part right here where the head ends and the hair begins is an area that I always thought the hair had to completely cover, that you weren't allowed to see such a harsh line between head and hair. And it always looked weird. And looking at Deckard here, his model that I was given, I was able to tell that wasn't quite the case. And so while it looks wonky in the initial sketch, like someone tried to comb back a mohawk or something like that, going back and fixing it made it look so much better. These two elements, combined with Deckard's hand pointing toward the camera in his pose, were the biggest challenges of his design, but I love how each of them actually turned out and connected and enhanced the piece as a whole. That being said, you'll notice with the two human characters in this project, that their faces seem very flat in terms of shading. Like the jawline has shading and the neck has shadows from, the head. But I never realized how much shadow there are on actual facial features. Like it's under the eyes here, or not under the eyes, but under the brow and below the lips. I never realized how little light hits those areas and how much shadow there actually is. And watching other art YouTubers, specifically Pop Cross Studios, I noticed that the eye itself, like the white and the pupil of the eye, are affected by shading. I don't know why I never did that before, but that's something I'm aware of now and want to start working on as I go forward in my pieces. There might be one or two in the future that don't have it, just because this is being filmed after I made those. You caught me. But it's something that's definitely in the back of my mind now for digital painting. And there you have it. Here is Deckard Monahan, the Bad.
The Robot, X3 or Triple X or Murder Machine. The last nickname I made up. But X3 is a loyal Warforged cleric who packs a punch, both literally and figuratively. He is a hoot to be around, since the both of us know how to enable our more violent tendencies. Despite that, from what I can gather, his main purpose is to protect Pebble at all costs. He even grew angry at the Vine members when they poisoned Pebble and myself. Most importantly, X3 is a good man. I say that despite calling him the Robot. Just like Pebble, they are both good men. The two of them make me want to be a better person, despite the fact that I am also really into stealing people's stuff.
While working on the script for this video, something I realized was commonplace for my art is that the longest descriptions always go to the art pieces that take the shortest amount of time to make. For example, my friend who voices Deckard, who's reading all these character backstories, when he sent me the audio clip, I split it up into Deckard, Prince Pebble, and X3, and X3 had the longest blurb about him when he was the shortest character to draw. And I'm very curious to see if this description, my design notes of him, exceeds the design notes that I had for the other two. And of course, by longest description, I mean only by a couple of seconds, maybe a minute. And shortest drawing, I only mean by like 30 minutes to an hour. So not huge drastic differences, but just it's interesting to see how that's been repeating through my art and my videos that I make for them. But also, X3 was the first one I did, and I used a lot of strategies that I didn't really use before, so that could be part of it. Now, I don't want to say X3 was a warm-up round, because I did put effort into it, and I like how certain aspects of his character design turned out. But as I mentioned before, the last time I did a digital painting of a character in full was many years ago. The last digital painting I did, save for the Deadlands weapons, was a piece called Scars of an Angel. And even then, I took a drastically different approach to one that I usually would take. I did this thing where I only used the line art for sketch and didn't include it in the final piece, which made me have to spend much more time and effort and concentration on the shading and rendering of all the different parts of that piece. So the last cel-shaded digital painting I did might be as far back as 2020. I focused a lot on Photoshop in the last few years. But with that, I even implemented new strategies that I haven't used before, mainly using a reference, and I talked about this in Deckard. I used an app called Magic Poser to make the poses of each three of these characters, export them, and then put them into Photoshop, so I had a one-by-one comparison while I was making the sketch of these characters. And let me tell you, references are beautiful. You can actually see how an anatomically correct person should look like and how all the different parts of a human body connect and interact and how the lines should be, especially at the angle you need them. And I feel very dumb not implementing that into my artwork earlier. I've used some references for the Deadlands, so that's where this really started, but when it comes to posing, I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner. I also found out a really cool tool in Photoshop that might be my favorite when it comes to weapon design, and that is the mirror tool. It only works for certain angles of weapons, obviously, but drawing only one half of the weapon and seeing the other half, the flip side, come in perfectly, there's something very cathartic about it. Obviously, it was fun to learn how to draw Deckard's gun with the reference at the angle, but this one was very easygoing. And between the symmetry and the rendering, especially the wooden textures on X3's mace, I love how the weapons turned out for X3. Like with the other two characters, there's certain elements of X3 that could benefit from improvement, and I want to draw your attention to the face. Hard surfaces are, well, hard. And if you look specifically at the nose and under the eye area, I struggled with showing the sharp angles of these parts of the face. The eyes aren't as noticeable because I added a glow that kind of covers them up, but the nose, you can tell I didn't really know how to separate such a harsh angle between one panel, I guess, of the nose and the other side. I fixed it to an extent in this one, but if I had to go back, that's definitely something I would change about X3's design. But without further ado, here is X3. The robot. And there you have it, the good, the bad, and the robot. While I like how all three of the character designs turned out, I like the insight I gained during the scripting and editing phase of this video. Like I said, the video and the actual art were a couple months apart, and if you noticed, I pointed out a lot of things with each of the characters that I could have improved on or that I struggled with. And I like that because now in this video I have a benchmark of what I wanted to work on at this point in time, and I can come back and look at this video later on down the line and be like, okay, this is what I said I wanted to improve on, how did I do from there? So retroactively, this was a really great learning experience for me, and I hope you guys took something away from it too, especially the mentality you should look at your old stuff with. Not as a sense of, oh, look how bad I was back then, but rather, look how far I've come since then. That's how I really like looking at this project, and even though it has only been like 2 months at most maybe, It's something that I definitely feel like I've even improved on since then. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Feel free to drop a like if you did. And if you want to see more D&D stuff that I've done, there's a video on one of the sides of me where I designed weapons for one of my friends' Deadlands campaign. That's got designs and story too, so if you're interested, definitely check that out on one of the sides of me. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.